So Shoe0nHead, everyone's favorite bunny girl, has put out a video in which she... That is not what I meant. There you go. So Shoe0nHead made a video in which she talks about a certain dilemma she experiences. Whatever. She talks about a dilemma that she has as a liberal who is part of the anti-SJW camp.
You know what kind of scares me? And do you guys relate? I'm a liberal, you know this. So I kind of almost feel like, am I like the 40s equivalent of the guy going, like the 40s PSA of the guy like, oh, those homosexuals, I just don't understand them, that's not scientifically right. Am I that right now? Like, I'm actually, sometimes I second guess myself and I'm like, what if I am that right now? What if I'm like, oh, these genders, oh, they're just crazy. Does anyone else feel that way? Like, I'm almost worried that maybe it is a thing and I'm like, ah.
So, we have a damsel in distress here. This looks like a job for Zarathustra's serpent. After all, this is what I said I would do on this channel. Help define true liberal views and distinguish them from the regressive left. The problem June talks about here is experienced by many liberals nowadays, and is the main cause for what I've been calling the passive regressives, those people who are liberals but are being taken for a ride by the regressive left because they don't want to be called bigots. June is more aware than the passive regressives, and she can sense where liberalism ends and anti-liberal radicalism begins, but she's still finding a hard time explaining it. So, let's try to help her with her dilemma. So first of all, June, and all those who feel like her, let's remember that being an out-of-touch bigot is not the only danger we should beware of. History has showed us that a much bigger danger comes from those leftists who believe that they know what human society should look like, and try to impose that image on the rest of us. So not every so-called progressive change is a good change, and as a liberal, you must resist your natural inclination to support such changes, and maintain your critical thought. The liberal thing to do is to keep the door open for the possibility that the proposed change is good, but demand evidence first. In my video titled What's Right and Who's Left, I defined leftist thought as a way of thought that wants to improve society and make it more compatible with the ideals of enlightenment, such as freedom, justice, equality, and peace. But I distinguish between the liberal left and the radical left. The liberal left understands that human nature isn't perfect, so we can never achieve a society that fully lives up to these ideals. We therefore don't try to create an entirely new system, but work within the democratic system, try to detect places where it can be improved, and push for changes in those particular places. The radical left, in contrast, believes that the natural human condition is to live in a perfect society, and it is just the current system that is preventing us from living in that utopia. So wherever there is inequality and injustice, the radical will not blame the faulty human nature for it, but claim that it is the result of the oppressive system. The radical does not want to improve the system, but to bring it down and establish a perfect system instead. Most people understand by now that radical leftist thought is not practical, and only leads to bad results. But now, I pointed out, we have a new kind of left, the regressive left. I've defined the regressive left as a sly version of the radical left, in that it does not openly advocate for utopia, but still judges society by radical standards. For instance, the regressives define today's Western society as a patriarchy, even though there has never been a society that gave women more freedom and equality. This is because they do not compare it to the past, but judge it against the utopian ideal. Similarly, they define it as a rape culture, even though it is by far the safest society ever. Again, this is because they do not judge it by fallible human standards, but against a utopian state in which there is no rape. But since they do not explicitly call for a revolution that will lead to utopia, they manage to confuse many liberals to make them believe that patriarchy and rape culture are a real thing. And since liberals don't want to support oppression and rape, they become passive regressives, unknowingly supporting radicals. To prevent ourselves from falling into this trap, we need to use critical thought on every issue deemed progressive, and follow its logic to the end, to see if it answers a real problem, or stems out of the belief that our society is oppressive. So, with that in mind, let's see what got Shoe0nHead confused.
But then he was like, oh, biological sex is on a spectrum. I'm like, Bill! It's not! Bill! What are you doing?
The video June uploaded is part of a longer Q&A livestream that she did, and in this part she was commenting on Bill Nye's new television series. The series is dedicated to science, but in the episode discussing sexuality, Bill seemed to be promoting the idea that there are more than two sexes and more than two genders. I've already made an extensive video on this subject, so here I'm going to be more succinct. Let's begin with clarifying the terminology, since June seems to be confused about the difference between gender identity and gender expression. And I noticed that her boyfriend Armored Skeptic also seemed to be confused about it in the video that he made on the subject. I suppose many others are confused as well, and I don't blame you, so let's do that first. So, first of all, there's biological sex. That's easy to understand. There are certain anatomical components that determine our biological sex, such as genitals, chromosomes, hormones, and more. If you are male, there's a certain range in which these components will typically be manifested in your body, and for females the range is different. Gender expression is also pretty easy to understand, and it means the way that the two genders typically express themselves, like wearing a dress if you're a woman or wearing a tie if you're a man. Gender expression is mostly a social construct, although part of it is probably based in biology. The fact that men and women tend to express themselves differently emotionally, for instance, is partly a social construct, but probably also partly the result of the different hormonal makeup. Where it gets confusing is when it comes to gender identity. The claim is that along with our biological sex, we also have a gender identity, the way in which we psychologically perceive our own gender. This observation is mainly due to the existence of transgendered people, those who feel that they are the opposite gender of the biological sex. It's a weird thing for most of us, but it does make sense to me. I think it is perfectly reasonable that part of our human psychology is the perception of our own sexuality. It is part of our sense of self, which most of us don't think about because it is natural to us, but with some people it is... Can you please concentrate? Dear viewer, we are trying to have a serious scientific conversation here. We can't do it if you keep trying to imagine June in bunny girl outfits. Please show some respect, alright? Good. Now where were we? So, as I said, it makes sense that we are also born with a gender identity, which is part of our psychology. And it also makes sense that occasionally nature gets its wires crossed, and creates organisms whose gender identity is the opposite of the biological sex. And so we get people who feel alienated to their anatomy, alienated to the gender they were assigned at birth based on their biological sex. Those are what we call transgendered people. But now, we have the non-binary people, who are taking it a step further. They claim that there are many gender identities, not just male and female. They claim to have a different gender identity, which makes them feel alienated to both the male and female definitions, and demand that we recognize their gender. To corroborate their demand, they claim that there are more than two biological sexes, so why wouldn't there be more than two genders as well? They also claim that biological sex, gender identity and gender expression are completely independent from each other. And it seems like Bill Nye is supporting these claims. Now I'm a philosopher, not a scientist, so why do I feel like I have the authority to speak on this issue? Because this really has nothing to do with science, but with something else. And June, intuitive as ever, senses what this is really about.
I don't know. Fuck. What is English? What are words?
Exactly. This isn't about science, this is about misuse of language. Let me explain. The claim that there are more than two biological sexes is based on the existence of intersex people. Those are people whose anatomical components are not all compatible with one of the sexes. So, for instance, one can have male genitalia, but not XY chromosomes. Therefore, claim the non-binaries, we can't say that they are male or female, so they must be a different biological sex. But this is not how our language works. In everyday language, there is no exact definition for any term. Rather, it works on the concept of family resemblance, where every term covers a range of different items. Some of these items are typical to the family, others are atypical, but they all belong to it. So if you have most of the components of a female anatomy, but you are missing a uterus, or you have male gonads, that simply makes you an atypical female, but you are still a female. Scientists who explore intersexuality may create their own taxonomy to classify different types of intersex people, but that doesn't mean that as a society we need to treat them as different. The only thing that would justify creating another category for them is if they present a different sexual function for male or female, or if their sexuality is manifested differently. I have seen no such examples, so we are left with the two biological sexes. Non-binary people also like to point out that there have been human societies that did define more than two genders. Yes, but that was because these societies were not liberal. They had a strict definition of male and female, so if someone's anatomy or gender expressions did not obey these definitions, they created a different category for them. Usually, that also meant that they ascribed other traits to them, and basically imposed an identity on them. This is exactly the kind of thing that liberal society is trying to avoid. As liberals, we do what we can to prevent the relegation of curiosities to a different category, and to get society to regard them as belonging to one of the existing categories, as nothing more than atypical exemplars of that category. Now let's go back to Shoe's dilemma. She's worried that in her rejection of the non-binaries' demands, she is acting the same as those who in the past rejected the demands of LGBT people to be recognized in their divergence. Can we point out to a difference between the two cases? Well, let's think about what the LGBT people were up against. They were in a situation where they were alienated from their nature, as society imposed on them an identity that was not in accordance with it. Gay people felt attraction to people of their own gender, but society did not allow for the existence of an identity that acts according to that attraction. And trans people felt alienated to their anatomical body, and to the gender they were assigned based on it. Therefore, they were miserable, and society had to be changed to stop their misery. And now, non-binary people claim to suffer from the same problem. They claim to have a gender identity that makes them feel alienated to our society. But here I have to ask them, what are you alienated to? You do not claim to be alienated to your body, and there is no behavior or expression that is forbidden to you. So where's the alienation? Where's the oppression? When you listen to them for a while, you realize that what they are actually saying is that they are alienated to language. They don't want a language in which one term covers a large variety of instances, but a language in which every one of them will have a label that defines them in their uniqueness. So it is their language against our language, and they claim to be oppressed because we refuse to adopt their language. But what obligation do we have to adopt your language? The only way you can get me to adopt your language is if you can show me that it is based on reality. And that's indeed what the non-binaries are trying to claim. They claim that they naturally have a different gender. When you ask them to corroborate this statement, they answer that this is how they feel inside, and since we don't have their experience, we can't tell them that they are wrong. Well, I'm sorry, but if you are making statements about objective reality, you cannot corroborate them based on your feelings. As I've shown in another video, identity is something that has to be earned. If you want me to accept that you have a certain identity, you will have to base it on objective reality, and use reason to convince me. I have no obligation to accept your identity just on your say-so. Take Shoe0nHead, for instance. She identifies online as June Lapin. Or is it Lapine, Lapine? I don't know, and it doesn't matter, because I seriously doubt that that's her real name anyway. In other words, I don't accept this identity, because it doesn't seem reasonable to me. If you're wondering why I have such doubts, it is because Lapin, in French, means a girl bunny, and oh no, okay, forget it, let's move on. Now, as a liberal, I am open to the possibility that there is something behind these non-binary identities. I don't mind at all if they create a subculture based on this non-binary taxonomy that they have created, and I will defend the right to have that subculture. Except it's not just a taxonomy, is it? It is a hierarchy. They claim that their gender identities are oppressed, and demand that we change our language and change our system to incorporate them. And this is where we learn that they are not liberals, but radicals. They begin from the axiom that our society is oppressive, and create their identities based on that. But, true to the regressive model, they hide their radicalism. They claim that they are not aiming to radically transform our society, but merely want us to accept them into it. They will tell you that it will have no effect on the rest of us, and will just allow them to be who they want to be. But, is that really the case?
Also, I feel like all this just like invalidates the existence of girly guys and boyish girls. It's like, what happened to them? Is that not a thing anymore? Is it like, you have to be like, whatever? I don't know.
Bingo. Once you start classifying people in different categories, you are partitioning them into different identities and limiting their freedom. If we allow the non-binaries to have their way, we would all lose some of the freedom that we have now. Since their variance is ultimately manifested through gender expression, it means that we will lose our freedom to express ourselves in certain ways, because it might get us labeled as a gender that we are not. That is why they are regressives. They are threatening to take us back to darker times, to regress to a society that is less free and tolerant. As liberals, therefore, we must resist this trend. Okay, I hope I helped put things in order for any confused liberal out there. Before I go, I would like to apologize to Shoe0nHead for the way my subscribers behaved during this video, repeatedly trying to imagine you as a bunny girl. Bunch of perverts, the lot of them. You should all be ashamed of yourselves. And, again, if any of you non-binaries thinks that I am wrong, please tell me about it in the comments. But first, you should know my gender and pronouns. As my viewers know, I have already announced my gender once, but since then I've gone through some more self-exploration, and realized that I am something else. I am master gender. Master gender is like a master key. It can be any gender at any given time. Which is great for you because it means that I can be any gender that you are, and can understand what you are going through. Another thing about master gender is that it can be either binary or non-binary. So when I am talking to a binary person, I am binary myself, and my pronouns are he and him. When I talk to a non-binary person, I am master gender, and my pronoun is my master. So, if you want me to use your pronouns, this is how you should refer to me.